Hi guys, we're just giving everybody a bit more time to join. Vivian's mic is not working, but she'll be facilitating our presentation today and giving more people a little bit more time just to get into the meeting. Huh? You guys can hear me, right? Yeah, everybody can hear me. All right, so let's give everybody a little bit more time to join. Jessica. Hi, Steve. I said hi to Steve already. I've been saying hi to. Hey, Debbie Dean.
Hey, how you doing? I can almost hear you through the window.
Are you upstairs?
Yeah, I'm upstairs.
So let's give everybody. We have 16 people on the call. So let's give everybody a little bit more time. Hi, E. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Pauline. Hey, everybody.
Hey. All right, you want to see my. Okay. Yeah, so let's get started. We can I can hear my echo. Hold on a second. I can hear my echo. So welcome to the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee. Anika will be joining us shortly, but we're gonna get started. So let's start. Trish is here. Hi, Trish. Hi, Mildred. Next slide, Vivian. So our meetings are.
Hello.
Hey. So our meetings are presented in accordance with our Board of Education members, and they're on the screen. And I think Jennifer is actually in the audience. So next slide. Anika does this much better than I do. So we actually have an updated presentation for all the staff in terms of who we're working with. These are just a list of who we're working with. So Jill, Hogandike, Samantha, Emily, Sean, Kathy, Chris, and myself are the staff people that are usually on the call and available for questions or any other concerns you may have. Sam just joined and I'm waiting for Anika. All right, next slide. So again, our meeting protocols, we talked about having your screen on, rename your screen to reflect your name and your group. I understand some people may be under the weather. And if you are, you're not required to be on screen. Only voting members and participating staff can use the chat. It should only be used when asked specific for specific agenda topics or tasks. And you can, meeting participants and audience can only speak during public comment. And as a reminder, only our SBAC representatives can vote. Next slide. This is our Google Meets update that Anika has put in to help all of us who are having issues with Google Meets. It talks about the mic, the positioning of turning your camera on and off, captions, raising your hand, leaving the meeting, sharing the meeting, view, remove, pin participants, send chat messages, and use breakout rooms. How does one rename themselves on Google Meets? Who can answer that? Let me see.
My
I would
understanding is that you can't. You have to change the name on your Google account.
really. So
That's what I
even
was
if you go
advised.
if you go to people, um, anybody else has
I was one
knows
that
anything?
asked. Yeah, I was one that asked just because it was mentioned earlier, like the
To change
renaming.
your
Yeah, to say who you're
yeah.
representing. So that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think you can do it. Usually you could do it like from just log on to the three dots beside your name, but I don't think we can do it here. So I think Vicky is correct. You have to do it in your Google account. Anybody else has any other updates for us on that?
I can confirm what Vicky just said. It's true. I researched it and I've actually changed my name that way. But
So
you have to complete.
you can't really add your affiliation.
Okay, so
Right.
that's
So
something that should be noted. All right, thanks.
yeah. Thanks, Regina. That was it. That was the Zoom days, right? Before Google Meets.
So Pauline, do you want us to put it in the chat for every meeting, who we are and what we represent? Or
No, I think Vivian, this is being recorded, right? We're recording. She said yes. So I think there's a way that Vivian goes through the notes and then we get the information based on the notes. So I don't think we kind of know who's where. Hey Nicole. So I don't think we need to do that. I think we're okay. Next slide. So again, reminding everybody about our purpose, our roles and responsibilities. Our focus is to review the budget procedures or any specific study items. The focus of this organization and this group is the unrestricted general fund. I'll be taking you through that in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. But of course, this is an opportunity for us to look at the entire district's budget and come up with recommendations in terms of benefiting the unrestricted general fund. Mildred, I thought you were in Nikia for a minute. I was like, oh, she's here. So, so, so this is a slide that we have at every meeting, and just to remind everybody and to ground everybody in terms of what the functions of the Budget Advisory Committee shall be. And we obviously appreciate written recommendations and oral presentations to the board at the superintendent's request or at the committee's initiative. So you're a conduit basically from the superintendent to the board, and any presentations that are needed will be at your request or your initiative or the superintendent's request. Next slide. And again, all our presentations are grounded in our mission and our 4Es. And I'm always being tested on this in our meetings. And I have to always look at it because I never remember it. But it is to enable and inspire our diverse student body to achieve academic excellence and make a positive contribution or make positive contributions to our world. Lofty goals, and one that we're totally focused on, and one that lots of challenges still in terms of achieving this goal, but it is our mission, and we're unified in focusing on this mission. Next slide. So this is our agenda. Roll call will be done. Vivian can do that, just checking on the screen. Her mic is out today. We're going to do public comment first. We're going to look at the current budget climate. We're going to look at a draft target. It's draft because we have a lot of unknowns at this time. We're going to have strategies for moving towards the target, and we're going to align around key data points, comparing ourselves to other districts, and then we will close and get ready for the next meeting. With that being said, do we have anybody for public comment? Can you raise your hands or indicate if you're here for public comments? Anybody seeing anybody here for public comment? Seeing none, we'll push us on to the next item. And she's here! And I turn it over to Superintendent Ford Mortel.
Good evening, everyone. I don't know why she always does that. I like to sneak in. So
I know.
I thought you all were going to do like connectors and all the niceties before we got started. So apologies for being late. And Pauline just went over our agenda for this afternoon. Again, you see and are reminded that we have some big conversations ahead of us as we think about how we are going to respond to the necessary budget reductions and balance our budget in ways that continue to support and move us towards our shared mission statement that I know Pauline read to you all eloquently. So I only actually have 2 slides before I pass it back to Pauline. Next slide. Just wanted to remind us all that as we move, again, towards doing the hard work of making reductions while still holding a very robust and revolutionary mission in mind, that we remind ourselves that our challenge is not that, but that we are making sure that as we make these decisions that we spend today's dollars on today's kids or today's children, but not at the expense of tomorrow's children. And it might seem like, of course, but it is not atypical that when districts and teams are coming together and having to make decisions, particularly decisions to the fiscal magnitude of the ones that we are about to make yet again, you sometimes only focus on the now and forget about or don't think about planning for the next or for the tomorrow. So as we engage in these budget conversations, as you see the multi-year projections, as you think about our current, not just ours, but also the states and the county's current fiscal situation, our response is, of course, to address and respond to the situation. But we're going to have to do it thinking about today and our current circumstances while also making sure we have a resource and strategy to support the children of tomorrow. Next slide, please. The other thing I want to remind us of as we go forth and do this work is that it is going to require us to prioritize. And that is a hard word for me, at least. I'm particularly thinking about money, right? Because it's not just budgeting, it's actually making some really hard decisions around what do we really value or what are we wanting to make sure we focus on and do. And so Steve Jobs reminds us in this quote here that focusing is about saying no. And what that means is that when we're engaged in these conversations, we are going to have to say no to doing some things. We're going to have to say that we can't start some things new. We're going to also have to say, probably the hardest thing to say, is that we're going to have to stop doing some things that we are already doing and that some of us love and enjoy the fact that we do. And so reminding us that focusing is about saying no, and that we should not try to do everything. We should do a few things, or in this case, Steve Jobs says one thing real well. When I saw these 2 quotes by Steve Jobs, it reminded me of a quote that I used to say. In fact, it's a quote that I said a lot in SBAC. And so in your chat, I want to see who remembers what is the thing that I said to you all over and over and over again, to the point that I remember Director Babbitt teased me. People tease me because I said it all the time. That is similar to this idea. I'll give you a couple seconds. Oh, look at Rebecca. Look at that. Come on, Nicole. Look at Jill. Oh, Jill, you're cheating. Natasha. So y'all know it then. Go ahead and click that slide, please, Ms. Vivian, because I had all the animation. Y'all, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And that's going to be a hard pill for a lot of us to swallow because we are doing so many great and amazing things here in BUSD. We were able to make the $7.2 million reductions last year without really feeling it. And I think I said to you all two meetings ago that we are going to feel it this time. And so as you prepare to engage in the conversations today, as you see what the fiscal climate is, not just for Berkeley, but for the state and the county, and as you see more about what our target is, brace yourselves, prepare to say no, and prepare to remind yourselves and each other that we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And everything that we do has to be about today's children, but also keeping in mind tomorrow's children as well. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Pauline to share you more about what's going on in BUSD, but also in the county with regards to budget.
Okay, thanks, Anika. Next slide, please, Vivian. So this was a slide that we got when we attended a meeting at ACOE. It was a joint meeting with HR, Ed Services, and Fiscal. And this kind of summarizes exactly where we are right now. Stormy weather ahead. Who needs to mute their mics? Who's okay? So we talked about this concept of a fiscal cliff before, and here it is again. K-12 education is facing a fiscal cliff, not only in California, but it's actually nationally right now. And this is as a result of several different things. One, we have the sunsetting of federal COVID funds. Most districts and most, not only in California, we're seeing declining enrollment. We're having challenges with absenteeisms. We're having persistent inflation. And of course, we're seeing increasing cost of labor obligations. So brace yourselves. It's going to be a stormy road ahead and pretty rocky as well. So with that, Vivian, can we go to the next slide? So this is the current reality in Alameda County. You can just enter, Vivian, it will come in. So we're seeing declining enrollment, not only in our district. Our district is somewhat flat. We're not declining rapidly, but throughout the state, there's $250 million less due to the declining enrollment. This is actually in Alameda County. And of course, the money that we had for the one-time pandemic dollars, that's gone, over $1 billion. And this is for all of Alameda County. And then if you do enter, Vivian, this is actually then competing with ongoing costs. We've mentioned this before. Competition for staffing and inflation. We're trying to make sure we're staffed in light of what we pay. Inflation, it's difficult and expensive to live in the Bay Area, and Berkeley is particularly challenging in that regard. We want to be able to pay staff to live in the county where they work, but it's extremely difficult at this time. And of course, expected services, we have to meet our academic and social emotional services, and that is coming at an increasing cost. So we're not the only ones experiencing this. This is pretty much not only Alameda County, I would say probably statewide and probably throughout the country as well. Next slide. Oh, we moved on before. So as a result, we find a lot of people tapping into their reserves. 95% of districts are tapping into the reserves. And people can view our Fund 20 as a reserve, but there are other, Fund 17 is a reserve. There are other reserves that we want to set aside. People are now at the point dipping into reserves. Next slide. So who's tapping into reserves this year? In the Alameda County has 18 districts. 17 of 18 districts are tapping into the reserves. And I'm not sure which district is not. I will hazard a guess, but I won't actually. And then who needs to identify and implement budget solutions for 2025, 26 and ongoing, and or 26, 27, 17 of 18 districts. So this is just to let everybody know we're not alone. We're in the company. Oh, there it goes. Only Mountain House. Where is Mountain House? Does anybody even know? But anyway, they're the only district that's not tapping into reserves or identifying budget balancing solutions.
Mountain House is out by Tracy.
It's out by, it must be a state aid only. I mean, special, it probably doesn't have any state funding. It's probably a basic aid district. Not sure. Next slide. So let's take a look at our general fund, just in terms of the entire general fund, not only just the unrestricted, just to kind of orient us in terms of what we're working with our entire general fund, and also what our focus will be. So this looks at, gives us our, and this was the numbers that we had at the adopted budget. We're currently working on first interim, so these numbers will most likely change. But you can see in terms of our funding, this is for all of the general fund, including BSEP. So that's what is known in our SACS form as Form 1. I'll do a quiz one of these days, and I'll actually show you graphically how this is presented. So you can see in terms of our revenue, our LCFF is definitely the significant contributor to our revenue. Our base funding being 49.4% of Form 1, which is unrestricted and restricted revenues for the general fund and BSEP. So you look at other state revenue. Other state revenue can either be unrestricted or it can be restricted. So I have the breakdown of what actually makes up each of these pots that I can share with you at a different time. But right now we are focusing again on the unrestricted general fund. So we will be focusing on the 3.7 million. The restricted $20 million is for a particular purpose and most likely cannot be used for any general fund unrestricted purpose without supplanting. Our parcel taxes comes in at 27.7%. So you can see that is a significant contribution. And this is on the revenue side. And then our local revenue is at 6.8%. Our federal revenue is 2.3% at $5 million. So not a significant amount. Funds aren't threatened at this point in time. We're proceeding as if there are no changes other than what we actually have been told to take into account in our budget. So we're looking at $214.1 million in revenue in the district's general fund. That's unrestricted, restricted, Form 1, which is the general fund as well as BSEP. And this is a difficult concept for most people because most districts, their Form 1 is just the general fund. They don't have other funds in to kind of muddy the water. We actually have our parcel taxes in here as well. And then when we look at our adopted budget for salaries, you can see our certificated salaries, 41.2% of our Form 1. Classified salaries, 17.2. Benefits, 25.8. So salaries and benefits are the 84.1% that we've kind of shared with you. We've said anywhere from 80 to 90%. So you can see the number in the adopted budget was actually 84.1%. Books and supplies, 2.7. Services and operating expenses, 13.6. Capital outlay and indirect costs, it shows as a negative because that's actually money coming into us for services, net amount coming into the unrestricted general fund. So it's a net negative 0.8. So the total expenses that we're looking at for the adopted budget is 218.6. So you can see, even just looking at this, these two tables, revenue 214, expenses 218. This is not the complete picture because we have not looked at changes since adoption and we haven't taken into account the beginning fund balances. But just in terms of thinking about your own checkbook, if you're spending more than you're bringing in, you're basically relying on savings, and savings, unfortunately, they don't last forever. So the district is in a similar position. Vicky has raised her hand. Yes, Vicky?
So I want to confirm that SBAC will be focusing on the general unrestricted general fund, which is that 111. Is that correct?
It's not only that. I will come to that in another slide.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Vicky. So next slide. So this is what it looks like graphically. And just looking at the great big pieces, you can see that in revenue, as we expect, the LCFF kind of takes up a lot, most of that big blue area. And then in our expenses, our certificated salaries, which we had gone through before, takes up a lot, and our classified salaries and our benefits. So this is just graphically what our slides would look like when we adopted the budget. We are actually working on the first interim, like I said, so these numbers are going to change. And one thing we know about projections is that they are going to change, right, Vicki? Okay, good. As long as we're on the same page. All right, next slide. So this is what Vicki was asking about in terms of what is SBAC's focus. Do you need it a little bit bigger? Do you know how to make it bigger on your screens? You should have like a little plus on your screen. You can actually make this bigger on your screens. Can you guys do that? You guys are okay? All right, thumbs up. All right. So Vicki asked, what is the focus in SBAC versus what's the focus, what's the unrestricted general fund, what's in SACs? So our focus is just the first column. So Vicki, you can see that we have our expenses, our revenue. We have no federal revenue in the unrestricted general fund. This is our focus, the first column. We also have Fund 1, restricted. We have Fund 2, our maintenance parcel tax. There's a restricted and unrestricted portion. Then we have BSEP and Barrow, and that gives us the overall amount from total unrestricted, total restricted in fund, and the total fund. That's what's in SACs. And this is critical for everybody to understand this, because when we're talking about being able to give raises and what we are able to afford, we look at the unrestricted general fund. But a lot of people who are not clear on how our finances are organized may tend to look at these far three columns, which is actually including parcel tax and inflates or revenue and expenses and ending fund balance. So again, the focus is just on the first column, and these are our adopted numbers. Next slide, Vivian. So whereas in our adopted budget, we are looking at an ending fund balance of $3 million, it's not the same story at first interim. And we don't have all the numbers, but I can give you an idea of where we're heading at first interim. Any questions on that? It's essential that everybody understands how the unrestricted general fund fits into the entire picture and what our focus is in this meeting. Any questions? All right, next slide. So now we come to the target. And for us to look at the target, we have to update our information with what we know of at adoption and expenses that we have come to, that we've realized since adoption. And then we have to come up with a target in terms of what we're projecting our expenses to be in the out year. So, and we have to preview the draft target. And again, this is draft. We're just getting a jump on it because we know we have a lot of work ahead of us. But we really need to wait for the governor's January budget. We need to wait for first interim's numbers to be finalized. And we will have a little bit more information in terms of moving forward. So in terms of identifying the target, can we go to the next slide, please? This is a multi-year projection that I've shared before, and I've shared with the board. I think I've shared it here. This is our public document, and you can see what's different about this multi-year is that it has 4 years. Usually it's 3 because we're in the current year 24-25 and we just look out for 2 years, but we've added 27-28 because when we're working on the 25-26 budget, we'll be looking at those 3 years, 25-26, 26-27, and 27-28. So our assumptions have not changed at this point. We're using the information that we got in the governor's adopted budget for 24-25 in terms of assumptions for our COLA. We're gonna be reassessing this as we're wrapping up the first interim. But for now, we've been advised to use the assumptions that are in the dartboard. What I've been hearing, it's not particularly good news. The COLA, we're projecting it to be 2.93% in 25-26. Now, 25-26 is going to be the second year of our multi-year when I present the first interim. What the county has asked us to do is do our multi-year based on the 2.93% COLA, but also do one with a projection of a COLA of 1.93, which is a significant reduction. It's going to be over $1 million impact in terms of revenue. So I will be bringing that to the to SBAC after we're finished the first interim. Two versions of the multi-year projection. One based on the COLA that we have right now, and another one based on the projected COLA if it comes in at less than the 2.93%. Vicky. Yes, Vicky.
Yeah, is that the red line on the bottom, is that compounded, adding up year over year, or is that from the total from the beginning?
What are you talking
So
about?
is it like -4 and then the next year
Let me
minus?
wait.
Okay.
Let me go through, Vicky. If that's
Okay.
okay with you?
Yep.
I'll get there. Just give me a minute. All right, thanks. So our ADA and all our other assumptions are actually this is adopted budget, and we're asked to do a multi-year with a COLA, with a lower COLA. Base funding and local revenue, this is what we had at adoption, and expenses are now what we had at adoption. And now to Vicky's red line where she jumped ahead. We're saying that we're going to need, we're adding $4 million in 24-25, which is the year that we're working in right now. That $4 million in expenses that we know of includes contribution. Actually, no, it does not include contribution. Sorry. It includes the rates that the bargaining agreements that we settled. It's going to increase some costs there. It's going to increase some settlement costs. It has some other costs included for operational costs, $800,000. But this $4 million is what we think that these are expenses that we know of that we're going to add at first interim. The 6.8 is not an additional 6.8. It's a $4 million kind of carried on and an additional 2.8, and then that's ongoing for several years. Yes, Rebecca.
Can you just clarify the settlement piece?
The settlement piece, we have obligated ourselves to settlements for $500,000, which includes our settlement with one of the cases that we were on the hook for 10 million. The district was exposed for 10 million, but we were able to settle that for 100. And then we have two other cases that we're working on for $200,000 each. So that's 500,000, but that's one time. So beyond these numbers, this is just a combination of all the numbers that we're working with at this time, and we can share them with you when we actually do the first interim.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I move on? Nicole, you have a question?
Yeah,
No?
thanks. Yeah. You know me, I
Okay.
always have questions. You mentioned negotiations. Are those complete at this point?
We've settled with one union, and I think did it already go to the board? Who is on the call? Jill? Sam is here.
Yes, BFT we've settled with, and it went to the board at the last meeting. But the other unions are all still at the table for this year.
So that
Okay.
amount of the settlement we're going to designate, because it's very difficult to change salary schedules and stuff within this time. So that amount, the cost of that settlement will be designated. when we actually do the first interim. Any other questions before I move on? Rebecca, you have a question? No?
I asked it. I forgot to put my hand down. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. All right, next slide. So in addition to our revenue and our expenses, of course, we have our sources and uses, which are like other transfers in and transfers out, and transfers in from BSEP and transfers out to support our special ed program. So we, based on closing the books, and I've talked to this group about this before, we are anticipating an additional $500,000 coming in from BSEP due to the sub costs. We will be benefiting from an increase in the sub costs. We're estimating this to be $500,000 at this point, but remember, we haven't done the average teacher cost, and we have to look at that impact on the teacher template as well. So lots of moving parts, but this is what we know of at this point in time. Contributions to SPED. We had $28.3 million when we adopted. We're anticipating at this point an additional $1.4 million contribution to SPED ongoing, which is why it's the same number all across. It's not going to be doubling up. And we're also reevaluating this number. We have a meeting with SPED to determine if additional contributions will be needed at the second interim. So with those changes and trying to balance the budget, we are now in the blue section where we're looking at the target. It's not pretty. Yes, Rebecca.
Can you just explain the out to self-insurance fund?
We're self-insured, and any contribution that the general fund that we incur in for our deductible in the self-insurance fund is funded through the general fund.
And
so this is a general fund's share of paying the deductible for our self-insurance, for liability, and for our liability claims and our property claims.
And do most school districts self-insure?
Not all of them. They usually belong to a consortium, which can be good or bad, but that's something that we can explain. The benefit of being self-insured is that we are actually kind of charting our own path. So all our experiences in terms of losses or any other mitigating factors, it's only what BUSD does. If you join a pool and somebody in that pool goes south or they have like a huge loss, all of us have to bear the brunt of that loss. So we're a little bit more independent. I mean, not that you know who's going to sue you or which loss, but we're standing on our own, and we're supported by our various partners in terms of helping us with our workers' comp and our general property and liability insurance.
Thank you.
So, you're welcome. So now we're at the budget balancing solutions. So you can see there are actually entrances in here in 24-25 for Fund 20. You might also see that further up in the sources and uses, there's a contribution in from Fund 20 for $2.1 million. So as a reminder, the $2.1 million was a one-time budget balancing solution that we had when we came up with the $7.1 million to balance 24-25. So the $2.1 million was a one-time solution to ongoing, we really wanted ongoing cuts of 7.1 million, but you may remember that we actually ended up with using a one-time fix. In addition to that $2.1 million, we will need to transfer in the $2.4 million at first interim to balance our books and this is again not finalized. This is just based on, hold on, give me a minute, Steve. This is just based on what we're projecting at this point. We don't have all the bits and pieces, but we're projecting another $2.4 million contribution. The balance in that fund is about $6 million and gets replenished at a net rate of about $400,000 a year. And I can revisit, I had shared Fund 20 with you before. I think it was at 6 million after transferring out that 2.1. So the 2.4 million will be coming off of, I think, a 6 million, but I'll confirm that number for you. Is that your question, Steve?
My question is, what is Fund 20? Is that the workers' comp?
Oh, no, that's the reserve for our retirees in terms of their health benefits. This is a holding pattern for paying for future health benefits for retirees. And I had shared that with you. I can make sure it's in our data points. Another question. Yes, Vicky.
A few meetings ago, we have received some information with data from SPED expenditures. And in that information, there was a change from 22 to 23 of 3.9 million in the contribution from the general fund to SPED, which was about 15%. And so I'm now seeing in the 24-25 that there's this 1.4. So I'm wondering if that 1.4 is on top of the previous change of 15%.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. And what I shared with you was 22-23 and 23-24. So from 23-24 to 24-25, there was an increase. And then there's an additional increase of the 1.4.
Okay. Thank you.
So, yeah. And we're not alone. All districts are seeing an increase in special ed costs. So, I'm trying to see if I have the Fund 20 number, but I'm going to push us on. I had shared that before. Okay. So in terms of this year, we know we're going to, at a minimum, need a contribution from Fund 20 of $2.4 million to meet our commitments and stay positive for 24-25. But what does that actually do to our bottom line? With the changes that we've put in since adoption, we're projecting that our change in fund balance, revenue less expenses, we're spending $2.6 million more than we're bringing in. And the beginning balance is 3.6. So we're looking at an ending fund balance of $1 million. Again, these are preliminary numbers based on what we have. We have not finished the first interim. We may get more money. It may be not as bad as we think, but this is what we know right now, and this is what we're sharing. This will be replaced by first interim. Then now we look at 25-26. So in terms of our contribution, we're looking at the 0.5 ongoing, the contribution to SPED, the 1.4 ongoing. Vivian, can you go back one slide, please? Right, so you can see that we're anticipating additional expenses of $2.8 million in 25-26. And we'll be sharing that with you in terms of what is included in this amount. But suffice to say, it's an ongoing 4.2 the 4 million that we had in 24-25, plus addressing the one-time fixes that we had in 24-25, which is $2.2 million. And then we have $600,000 in additional costs. Huh? Oh, Dan's hand has been up. Dan, sorry.
No
Dan,
problem.
sorry.
No problem. My question's for the table we were just at.
This one or the one before?
The one that comes after it, but was before. This one. So
okay, all right.
this is fine. Okay. So I presume the 17.7 is just the class size reduction money that gets transferred in BSEP?
Yes.
And so since BSEP has a COLA, why are those flat numbers going across?
Because we haven't done the increase in revenue or expenses for BSEP. If we did the revenue, we'd have to do the expenses as well. So we
Right,
don't at
okay.
this point. So it may
So
be better.
they're both without the adjustment.
Right.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Can we go back one? Oops. Yeah, this one. So the 4 million is now 2.8 in the out years, and that's for additional expenses, including one-time solutions in the prior year. And we'll be discussing this with you in more detail. But for now, we're estimating this cost at $6.8 million. So next slide, Vivian. So with these assumptions in place, we're looking at an ongoing target of $8.3 million. Last year it was 7. We thought that was a heavy lift. This is a heavier lift. And then we have an additional one-time balance budgeting solution of 0.5. So in 25-26, we're looking at the target of $8.8 million. 26-27, 8.3, and 27-28, $8.3 million, with the understanding that we have settled with one union in 24-25, and we still would have to settle with all unions for the out years. So $8.8 million is what we would need to set as a target for us to have an ending fund balance, which is the first green row, of $1.5 million in 25-26, $2 million in 26-27, and $2.8 million in 27-28. Unknowns, we don't know what our bargaining, collective bargaining agreements are going to cost in the out years. We don't know if the COLA is going to be as the what is actually on the dartboard now, what the state is going to actually give us as a COLA. And with those balances on the first green line, we can meet our obligations for our assignment for LCAP and our revolving, which gives us, an ending fund balance of 0.6, 1.1, and 1.9, which is really just not a lot of money and a lot of cushion for the district. So we're in dire straits. Stormy weather is definitely here. 8.3 is a heavy lift for a district our size. But this is what we think of as a target. But again, it's a temporary target, and it will change as we get additional information. Yes, Vicky and Matt Meyer. Vicky first and then Matt.
So you said that we do meet our obligations with these numbers that are highlighted in green, but I thought that our reserve had to be like 3%, but that's not necessarily an obligation, that's a recommendation.
No, that's an obligation, but it's held in Fund 17.
Oh, so that's not included right now in these numbers.
Not in these numbers. When we look at the first interim, we can recast those numbers.
Okay, thank you.
When we close the books, we move the amount that we needed for Fund 17 for the reserve into Fund 17.
So we've set it aside already.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm. Matt?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. 8.3 is a pretty steep number. It would be, I'm interested in knowing, and not necessarily today, but in the future, how we got to 8.3, knowing what we know about ADA, knowing what we know about the increased costs. I'm interested in us understanding the increased costs wherever they may be. Because, there is a COLA adjustment in 25-26, although ADA average is going down, but this is the third year of the decrease, right? So it's, I can't quite see it from these numbers, but I'm very interested.
Yeah. So what we did, Matt, we showed what was at adoption and we showed the projected change. So we said increase in expenses was $6.8 million on the previous slide.
Yeah, so that's what I'm interested in. Is
we will unpack that.
0.8 because
Yeah.
if you're trying to think of efficiency and cost saving measures, it's really
Right.
important to understand what
This is
changed
one.
between adopted budget and first interim, which I know is not out yet.
Mhm.
You know, in a kind of a detailed way. You know, bargaining only is responsible for a very small a portion of that. You know, this is, I know because of our other meetings, it's mostly from other places where this is putting pressure. And I just think for this group to really get ahead of this, it's really important to understand, you know, where our inefficiencies are.
Agreed, 100%. But I will be sharing as we get more information at the first interim. Um, it 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 will help us, I think, moving forward. So the $6.3 million, we know in 24-25 we are committed to $4 million in additional expenses. And that will be fleshed out in the first interim. And again, that's an estimate. It may be offset by increased revenues. We are going to recast the teacher template. We're going to look at our UP. So we're in the process of doing that. We just did the cutoff on the 31st. So we're busily crunching numbers to see what the first interim might be like. This is why we call it a draft target. So it's a draft. But this, I would suspect, is the absolute worst case, unless in January we're told that the COLA is 0 or point whatever. So based on the information we have now, this is what we're looking at, a draft target, and this is our assumption moving forward. This will change in, I would say, 3 weeks, because by then we would have the first interim, and we will have a better idea in terms of, and probably we would have settled with other bargaining groups. Hopefully. So this is what we're projecting. Matt, did he just disappear? All right. So again, where does this leave us? It leaves us with a very tight budget, a barely balanced budget. And Vicky, our 3% is in Fund 17, but we may need to actually allocate some more, but we'll keep you posted. So it's great that we're getting an early jump on this. But the earlier we jump on stuff, the less we know, right? So, but at least we're starting at this point, and then we'll be training it up as we get more information. Next slide. Unknown factors that impact the target. Our first interim numbers, I keep harping on that. Our COLA, we don't know what's going on. We're looking at the January budget. And we're also looking at our ADA and enrollment projections and our UPP as well. So on duplicated, the students that are fair and reduced students, our language learners, looking at a text from her. Next slide, please. And I think at this point, I will turn it over to Anikia. Is Anikia there? Oh, yes, she is. All right.
Well, again, I just want to just do it one more check to see if there's additional questions about the draft target that was just shared. Aware that we will definitely come back and revisit this and give you a chance to ask questions again later, but just didn't want to move on if folks still had some burning questions or the places of clarification regarding the target itself. Okay.
So I will confirm that I can report that there will be 8.3 million in targeted cuts for next year's budget, correct?
Yes. And so one thing, thank you for asking that question, Vicki. So I have been using the word draft target just because, as Pauline said, there's still some unknowns and in terms of things that might positively or not so positively impact the target number. And I am actually working with Trish McDermott, who is our communications person to get some talking points that I can share out with you all, just as folks on the SBAC and therefore representatives of different advisory committees, so that you can go back and say it, and we could all be saying it the same way, Counting Boys. So if you feel like you just got to say it tomorrow, then yes, I would say this is our draft target given what we know now. But again, we are going to be having some more specific talking points for all members of SBAC to be able to use. So I hope that'll be helpful. Ms. Beatriz?
Hello, I'm sorry for coming in late. Just the last 3 years, we've been bringing in TK children, and that has not increased funding your ADA, the ADA for the district as a result of those TK students coming in to the district.
Let me see if I don't know if Pauline, if you could answer that, Ms. Beatrice. I don't want to misspeak, so I'm going to see if either Jill is on the line or if Pauline can answer. And if not, I will definitely write that question down and make sure we can get back to you all with the specific answer.
The projections include the TK and pre-K and all our kids coming in. Francisco does our projections for all students coming in. But this is an opportunity for us to project out next year. So if there's an increase, we'll be taking that into account.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jill. You got it. Go ahead.
Yes, we're anticipating the need. So this is going to be the last year of the birth date cutoff move, and so we'll be taking students into TK now with I can't remember the exact September or August birthday. So we are anticipating that we're going to need to add a couple of TK classes, and then this should be the last year of that addition. Because we've been adding about 2 to 3 classes every year over the last two years. So this will be the third and final year.
That answer your question, Ms. Beatriz?
Yeah, I just thought that there was additional funding for the students versus the K to 12 in taking those TK students.
Just the ADA, the ADA.
Right.
Any more questions about the target or any numbers that inform or influence the target?
So if I could just respond, this is Samantha, about the TK. There is an increase in ADA, but it is balanced with the fact that we have to have a ratio of students to teacher, and so we have to have 2 staff members for every 20 kids. And so that increases the cost of our teacher template and our staffing at the same rate as adding classes and having the kids join us. So it balances itself out, is why there's not a great increase in revenue.
Thank you.
So I think it was Matt. I think we all agree that 8.3 is a big number, and definitely some questions around how do we get to that number. And I think we will continue to share information about how we got to that number and better understand that number. This very brief section of our agenda is to understand how we're going to move towards that number, that 8.3 in reductions. Next slide, please. You all have seen this 1,000 times, but really I think it's important, particularly in times like this where hard decisions have to be made, that we are aligned around some core values. I actually am about to go to another advisory committee, GSHAC, that is already concerned and has questions, our Gender Equity Sexual Safety Advisory Committee, around funding and around how we're going to make sure to protect our most vulnerable students. And so really wanting to remind us that as we move into these budget reductions, and as we move into a different leadership at the national level, that equity has to be at the core of everything that we do. And we're going to have to ask ourselves, how do we allocate our resources fairly, but also thinking about those students who have been historically underserved or not served at all. And then the other ones, of course, transparency, excellence, engagement are important. And I'm not going to read each one, but also really thinking about that quote that I showed earlier about making plans for today's children without forgetting about the children of tomorrow really speaks to our the necessity that we think about sustainability and stability as we go forward. And so we don't want to do what education does a lot, which is cut something and then it comes back and then cut again, or start something that we see is working and then stop it and then wonder why we're not seeing the results. So really thinking about how can we make decisions that are for the right now, but also are for the long term as well. So we're going to be revisiting these a lot more actively and intentionally as we go through this next round of reductions. And I say that we have in the past, but wanted to just again share with you all that we're going to have some kind of common way of talking about these allocations as we go forth. And those are found here in these core values of resource allocation. Next slide, please. I also want to remind you all that when we move towards the $7+ million reductions last year, we had a set of strategies that we kind of moved through. We are going to use these same strategies going forth towards the 8.3. And there were some that we used more last year than we did others. Remember, these are in no particular order, but it is pretty common practice to start with the one on the top, which is to evaluate and remove vacant positions. So we are going to go through that exercise again. And then the last one, the one we really try to stay far away from, is the consolidation and reduction of positions and program. However, I said a couple of meetings ago that this one is going to be the one that we're going to, move closer to with this second round of reductions than we did the last time. And so really wanting to call out, I think it was Matt again who said, we need to understand where our inefficiencies are. And so I wanted to speak to that fifth strategy says to look for inefficiencies, to identify examples of programs and positions where we duplicate efforts, or even when those efforts are not yielding the results or the outcomes that we're expecting. And so to that end, as an SBAC, part of why we're starting early is because we want to be able to actively implement these strategies. You are going to be with us looking at and evaluating programs. I think it was towards the end of last year, we shared with you a program evaluation template that we had created for all the different programs and partners that we have in BUSD, asking them questions like, what student population do you serve? What is your participation and attendance? What are your goals and what are your metrics? And then being able to monitor to see if those programs are getting the expected results. We shared that with you as a draft. And so we're going to actually have to formalize that template and bring it back to you, looking at data to figure out again what we're putting our money towards and if it's yielding the results we want to do. And so that's going to be one way that we identify inefficiencies, also how we identify redundancies, but it's also going to be one of the things that we have to look at as we prioritize. We might actually look at programs and say they're all doing great things, but again, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. And so wanted to just again say that these strategies, just like our core values of resource allocation, will have to really be exercised more intentionally. And we will probably have to have some homework for you as SBAC, appreciative of all your time you give during the meetings, but there will probably be some review and some looking at some things in between meetings so that we can come back together and have those robust conversations. Some of the other things that we're going to be doing as an SBAC, and you're going to see an example of it for this section, and we also did the last meeting, was to come back with information. And so as we think about our system and our efficiencies, we also are kind of cleaning up our books, if you will. We are looking at the cost of things. We're looking at where there's possibly more money going to something that we didn't know about. We're looking at our internal practices and our systems to figure out how can we better anticipate the cost of things and work better together cross-departmentally to avoid certain costs. And so again, wanted to call out these strategies for you all to know that we're going to have some level of rhyme or reason to get to that 8.3, a big level of rhyme or reason to get to that 8.3 reductions, but it is going to be a lot more of those middle strategies than it was last year. And we are already starting to collect information and data to be able to engage you in those conversations. Next slide, please. This slide really kind of speaks a little bit to the process, and it is just a draft. It's a copy actually of a slide that Alameda County shared that we kind of modified a tad and definitely are going to modify some more. But the idea is that as we go through those strategies, we are going to come with various proposals of ways that we can move to the 8.3. There's lots of different ways to get there, but we're going to come with proposals to you all. We're going to engage in discussions. We're going to look at data. We're going to talk about best practices and research to make some decisions around which proposals or which parts of those proposals actually make the most sense. And again, keeping us aligned to our core values and moving us towards our mission statement, which ones we want to move ahead. We will then reduce the number of proposals to a smaller number. I think we only had like 2 or 3 last year. We will likely have more this year, different scenarios of what it could look like. We will ask you to engage us in evaluating the viability of different proposals. You might be like, well, this is not going to work for this reason. It's not sustainable, or it actually destabilizes the system in the worst way, or it's actually not aligned to our core value of equity because we are then no longer providing services to these high need populations. So there will be an exercise for us to not just whittle down proposals, but us to also evaluate the viability of the proposals once they get to a smaller number. Then we're going to have to prioritize, because we might get down to 2 or 3 good proposals and then have to have a conversation around, which pieces of the proposals make the most sense, that are aligned to our priorities. What do we want to do or stop doing or start doing even? Sometimes that is the case, even with budget reductions. And we're going to come up with a couple of packages. Finally, we're going to all work together to get to our final proposal that we take to our board. And the board is then going to vote on that proposal. So we did this process last year, but we did it a lot faster, and the different parts of the process were not as discrete and called out. And so we're trying to come up with a visual to call them out for transparency's sake, but also to make sure we go through all the stages as we, again, go through a reduction that's a pretty significant reduction for BUSD, but for anybody after already making a 7-point something reduction the year prior. So just wanted to preview this with you to let you know that we are trying to be very thoughtful around this process, and we want to engage you and make sure you're aware of how the decisions are going to be made and what you will be making recommendations against. Sorry, Beatriz, Ms. Beatriz?
I'm sorry, you may have answered it. How much is 8.3 to our overall budget?
It's almost 8%.
8%.
Approximately.
Next slide, please. So that process is kind of new. And the other thing we wanted to call out to you all is that this also is an example from Alameda County, because as Pauline said, this is not just unique to BUSD. Perhaps the exact number is specific to BUSD, but across the state, there are reductions because of the storm that we are in and the storms that lie ahead fiscally. And so one of the things that has been done in SBAC past, and that ACOE really recommends as well, is to come up with levels or tiers for reductions. When we talk about prioritization, that's not the first thing we do, because there are things that we are required to do. And so as we're moving towards that 8.3, we want to be really clear, for example, like, what do we have to do as a school district? What can we not reduce, or what can we not cut? We will put those things in level 1. And then we talk about those proposals for reductions. They'll mostly be in level 2 and level 3. So we're thinking about how do we define the different levels or tiers of our initiatives, of the work that we're doing, to help us make the decisions around the reductions going forward. And so again, don't take a picture of this one. Don't start responding, because I have my own responses to this one. This is just a draft for us to let you know that this is something that we're working on, and we hope to bring it back to you as an SBAC at the next SBAC meeting, just the various levels and tiers of reductions and how we're going to inform what we don't touch, or what we touch first, and then also what we touch last. And so that's just a quick overview of the process of how we're getting there. And we'll, again, have more information for you, more specific information at the next one. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Pauline to take us through an exercise that will give us more information that might help our decision-making in the future, but also as a response to inquiries that you've made. I guess this is a chance for me to plug that whenever you ask us questions, either in the chat or we hear themes from the discussion that comes up, we try to come back, if not at the very next meeting, but at a future meeting, with more information about that particular topic or item. And so we shared you some information last meeting around some of our inefficiencies that we noticed. And so now today, Pauline is going to respond to a question just around what other districts are looking like and the situation that they're in, to give you some perspective about where we are as BUSD. So Pauline.
Thank you. Next slide, Vivian. So as we're looking at other districts and as we make decision, obviously data plays an important role. So we've started to look at other districts. How do they organize themselves? What is their funding like? How are they able to do the things that they do compared to what we are trying to do? So next slide. So this slide is very helps us look at revenues for other districts. So the far column aligns with our first column, our general fund, unrestricted general fund, Fund 1. So when you look at Berkeley, our base funding, we bring in 105 million, and we bring in about $6 million for LCAP or supplemental. Our state and local is 5.8. Our total revenues are healthy 117.3. Alameda, which is close to us in terms of size, their base is less. They have a little bit less enrollment. However, their supplemental is 7.4. Their state and local a little less. So they're less than we are at 109. Albany, which is really small, their total is 44.7 million. Oakland, our neighbor, huge district, huge LCFF, huge base, lots of state funding. They're coming in at 499 million. Pleasanton, larger than us, 157 in their base, only 5 in supplemental. State and local, 7,169,000. San Leandro, which is a little smaller than us, 92 in their base, but their supplemental is 28 million. Then state and local, 5, they're at 125. So what I want us to take away from this slide is that our supplemental funding has a huge impact on the amount of funding we're bringing in. And that's driven by our UPP, our unduplicated pupil percentage or count. So in Berkeley, we're looking at 6 million. San Leandro, which is a little smaller, they're at 28 million. This is year over year over year. They're bringing in that much more money. It's for their unduplicated students, but their rate is so high, it's like 77 or 78%. I'll share that with you later. That whatever they do district-wide benefits all students. I don't know what their LCAP looks like, but I know they have 28 million compared to Berkeley's 6. Our state and local funding, that's where we have our mandate block grant. We also have our transportation, home to school transportation reimbursement, and our unrestricted lottery. So that's giving us close to $5.8 million. And then that's state and local. So state is actually 3.7, and local has to do with our leases and our rentals, unrestricted funding, but coming in from a local source. This is not restricted funding. So any questions or any observations on this slide? I was just shocked that San Leandro brought in 28 million compared to our $6 million for their LCAP. That's huge. And San Leandro also has their salaries are higher. You know, they're able to operate, offer more with 28 versus 6. Matt?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So with the LCFF supplemental, are you including concentration dollars in that column or not including concentration?
Yeah,
dollars?
and that's the point. They get concentrate. I mean, I say supplemental,
because LCFF supplemental has to be spent on unduplicated students. The true supplemental, the concentration dollars do not. And so I think it's just important in the picture in this chart to separate those two things, because supplemental is going to be for very specific services for very specific students. Concentration dollars basically is another form of base funding. So
Right.
thanks.
So that's an important distinction. And I said supplemental because that's all we get, but this is actually their additional LCFF funding, which is supplemental and concentration funds. Because if they're at 77%, anything over 50 is concentration. So I'll change the heading on that. So thanks, Matt. That's important. But they I didn't realize that. I mean, we'll never get concentration funds, but I didn't realize that their concentration funds can be spent as if it's unrestricted. So, but just in terms of comparing ourselves to other districts and our overall funding, I thought this was a helpful slide, and I will make that correction. Any other observations or questions? All right, next slide. Natasha. That's helpful to know, Natasha. which San Leandro definitely does that, because their salaries, I mean, they pay for their own benefits, but their salaries are a lot higher than ours. In terms,
just because it's being recorded and everyone might not see the chat in the future, I just wanted to call out that Ms. Natasha said that many districts use concentration funds to increase salaries. That's what Pauline is responding to.
So in terms of parcel taxes, so I separated the parcel taxes. Alameda has a parcel tax 23.8. Our parcel tax, BSAP, Bearer, and maintenance 59.3. Then we look at the restricted programs. So our restricted programs tend to be our Title Ones and our, I can't think of any other ones, but I would think of like our Title Ones. We have like $5 million. Restricted state, that's where we look at like our ELOP, our ACES, Peralta, okay. Who just said that comment? Do you want to say, somebody just put a comment in the chat?
Yeah, this is Rita, PTA Council President. We get feedback from, as a PTA, the PTA Council gets feedback from Peralta PTA about how, we're fundraising too much and, it's really not our role to be paying for certain things. And when you can compare, and they compare us to San Leandro, and they compare, to other school districts in the area, it helps to see the breakdown of the revenue globally to better understand where the motivation Berkeley PTAs have for like, we want to be able to give more here if we're trying to, if these other districts are getting more from other sources. So it's helpful to see that. I think globally it would be an important thing for a lot of parents to be able to understand better.
So we could, that's usually in restricted local, because our funding that's coming in for a specific purpose, that's usually restricted. So Berkeley, that 12.6, that part of that is our SPED, but a lot of that is our contribution from our PTAs and other sources. So we are at $12.6 million, which eclipses San Leandro, Pleasanton by far, Albany. Oakland, only Oakland is kind of higher than us in this category. So this is where our PTA contribution is reflected, and I would expect that yes, we are higher than other districts. So we have contribution here, but it's not unrestricted. It's for specific purposes. So it's very beneficial for all our programs, but it's not coming in as unrestricted funds. So so these numbers are restricted state. I started to kind of let you know what was in our restricted state. I have the breakdown of all of this revenue if you'd like to see that. But that's where our Prop 28 funding is coming from. Our AM, that's our Arts and Music Prop 28. Our Arts and Music Instructional Materials grant is in here. SPEDS Preschool is in here. We have this A through G grant is in here. So we have a lot of our restricted state funding. This $19 million is pretty healthy as well, less than San Leandro's. So globally, and this is now where we're looking at Form 1, the 214 that I shared with you before. Berkeley comes in probably what, third, I mean, not shabby overall, higher than San Leandro, but the makeup of our revenue is different, and we can use it on different things. Alameda, we have pretty much eclipsed Alameda in every category, but Alameda remains the closest to us in terms of enrollment and ADA. Any other comments or any other takeaways that you guys have from this slide? Next slide, Vivian. I haven't seen any other comment. So this is where we look at our enrollment, our ADA, and our funded ADA. We're still benefiting slightly from the mitigating measures put in place for COVID, very slightly in terms of what we're being funded on and what our actual ADA is. So we're at 8732. San Leandro is at 8129. Alameda 8564, a little smaller than we are. Pleasanton is significantly higher. Pleasanton is also, they have a negative or a qualified certification, which means they may or they will not meet their obligations and their share of the reserves. So Pleasanton is qualified. I don't have a list of all the other ones that are qualified, but I know Pleasanton is. So our UPP numbers, you can see San Leandro, 77%, and that's what's driving their 28 million. And our UPP is at 30%. We're working to get that number increased. Alameda is up 39%. So this is a data point that we need to focus on and try to improve, because it will generate additional funding for our unduplicated students. Any questions? Next slide. This came from Pleasanton's presentation in terms of lifetime earning benefit over 25 years, and this is for teachers. Pleasanton, of course, is highlighted in red, but they're earning $2.5 million over 25 years. Berkeley, 2.2. Dublin is higher than we are. San Ramon, San Lorenzo is less than we are. So we're not stellar in terms of lifetime earnings, but in terms of work days, I think Berkeley has the lowest number of work days in the school year. So, Vicky, yeah.
The other charts had San Leandro, Alameda, Albany, but those aren't on these charts. Do you have those same schools for the lifetime earnings?
No, I actually just picked this out of
Okay.
Pleasanton's presentation. The others I put together. Matt has a hand raised. Yes, Matt.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify two things. A good number of our certificated staff is actually on 185-day calendar or 193. Only our secondary teachers are at 184. So just a point of information. And then the other thing, that the lifetime earnings benefit over 25 years, I don't think that includes the cost of healthcare to the employee. So it's not that these numbers don't actually add up the way that it may seem when you take into account the employee contribution to benefits, which is why we typically look at 3 points of the salary schedule and then add the average contribution to benefits, because it's a little bit more accurate in terms of comparison. But this is helpful to see. Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other comments? Next slide, Viv. And that takes us to the end of our presentation. Do we have any additional questions, or Anika, do you want to wrap up? Or Oh, Vicky has her hand. Yes, Vicky.
Yeah, I have a question separate from what we were just talking about. This was super informational, and I really appreciate you guys bringing this forward. I'm wondering, as we're moving ahead with all of these tough decisions, I personally don't know much about like unions or BFT or labor negotiations, and the biggest portion of our expenses is salary.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if we could do an informational boot camp for those of us who don't know about that, just to give us a little bit of information about what we can or cannot do when it relates to salaries. Because and the reason I'm asking that question is because we talk a lot about the teacher template, and recently I've noticed that when you look at the teacher template, there's the number of teachers that are in classrooms, and then there's the total number of teachers, and there are a fair amount of TSAs, and I really don't know how that relationship works. And again, the last person that we want to get rid of is people, but if that's the biggest portion of where we're spending money, um as people go, can we make TSAs go back into the classroom, or are they in key positions that we would be hiring a classified person for anyways? Or like, what are we allowed or not allowed to do when it comes to looking at efficiencies and in those positions? So both, I think, a request for more information on what we can and can't do and about that piece, but then also maybe a question about looking at TSAs.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Vicky. That's very timely. We have our position control reports that lists our TSCs. We're still kind of checking the numbers to make sure it's finalized. But I just raised that question in a meeting I had today, actually. So that's very timely. So, Rebecca?
Vicki, I think that's such a good question. And I assume, Pauline, when you bring the data forward, we'll understand what those TSAs are responsible for, right? What are they, what are they covering? How does this work? And I also assume that for example, the teachers that are part of the college and career center helping with that, that's not included in this, or is it? Is my other question. Are we doing some TSA as part of that, supporting the after school programming? Is that all paid for by Berkeley Development Group, or do we have another pot of money that's directly coming from the school and it's called a TSA in that context? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we have several funding sources and several what is it now, functions for TSAs. We've had it sliced and diced in every possible manner, but a lot of the funding is unrestricted programming or BSEP programming, and or for particular programs. But when we bring the list, it would actually kind of highlight all of that information.
Great.
I think it's Natasha first, then Matt, then Dan.
Actually, my hand was up by accident. It's okay.
Okay. All right, Matt.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that almost all the TSAs are funded through BSEP. There may be a small number funded through LCAP, and almost none are funded through the general fund. So it's just something to be aware of. And I'm sure the district can provide the funding sources, but that's like the general scope of it.
Yeah, you're correct. Yeah, thanks, Matt. And Dan?
So apropos of Vicky's comment, I think it would be helpful. You said before that the general fund or the unrestricted general fund was roughly 100 million, or that the 8 million was 8% of the total. I think it would be helpful to see how much of the unrestricted general fund is untouchable. Whether it's because they're teachers and there's no way we're going to cut teachers, or how many of the things or which of the things in the unrestricted general fund really are off the table, so that the 8 million really is going to come from the remainder. And so rather than being an 8% cut, it really will be I don't know, pick a number, 30% cut of
Right.
everything else.
That's
And
available.
I think that
right.
would be helpful for people to see.
Right. So I think what Anika had talked about, the different tiers, our goal is then to identify what's in the tiers and the funding source and the dollar amounts. So that would let us know like what's in tier one that's mandated, cannot be cut, the funding sources, how much of that is in the general fund and how much of that is in other funding sources. Yes, Matt, there are swaps that can be done. We cannot forget swaps. And then we'll also look at the different tiers as well. In tier two, it's not absolutely essential, but let's look at those programs. Can they be delivered in a different method? And as Matt mentioned as well, there are swaps as well that we can be looking at, in other funding sources. So, yeah.
So any additional questions or information that folks want, if you could just go ahead and put it in the chat. We do record these meetings and we do record the chat. I just think of the last 4 or 5 comments and acts that were made. It's yes, 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 and yes. I think Pauline just responded to you, Dan, and when I was showing you that visual of the different tiers or phases, that's exactly what we're going to do, is make sure we're being responsible. We know the things that we cannot touch because it's legally required, because it's going to negatively impact our work, et cetera, and then kind of move from there. So we'll be bringing that back to you again, hopefully at the next meeting. We were already going to bring to you all some information about our positions, specifically the TSAs, and to Matt's point, how they're funded. There can be swapped. We want to make sure that folks understand how they're funded first and what the responsibilities are. Again, that's going to come into play when we talk about our prioritization. But we know you need to have that information to make strong recommendations. Vicki, really appreciate the ask about the labor partner update to really understand what our contracts say, what folks do or don't do, and what we can and cannot do is make reductions. I think that'll come up in the tier conversation as well. But that was a unique ask, and so really excited to work with our labor partners. I'm sure that Matt and Ms. Mildred and Steve and I would, we would love to work together to come and do some kind of mini lesson or something with y'all to kind of bring you up to speed, because it's a different world. We're super appreciative of all of our labor partners, though, and we truly are partners. So I'm already volunteering them that they're going to help me figure out how to come back and share with you the information that you asked. And then just to Rebecca's question around TSAs, but she also talked about like after school, we're also going to be looking at our extended day and our beyond the school day programs, be it before school, after school, and even summer, and consider those things as we're making some decisions about what's next. So that's why I said all yeses to all of that. It won't be all in one meeting, but it will be chunked over time. And if there's other information that you all think will be helpful or questions that you have, please put them in the chat now. We are going to get ready to wrap this meeting because there's 2 more advisory committees after that, and I'm supposed to be at both. And because you all have dinner to cook and things to do, is BSEP allowed to be used to cover some of the deficit? We wrote it down. I don't even know why I read it out loud. We will not answer that question right now, Ms. We will definitely make sure we have the answer.
Are you kidding me?
At our next meeting, because otherwise it's going to be, it's G-Shack. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to make sure folks know, next slide, please, Ms. Vivian, is that we do have our next meeting planned. It's our December 11th meeting, same time, same place. You will get a calendar invite if you haven't already. And then remember that we are, per typical, when we start the new calendar year, we wait until our board configures and agrees on their board meeting calendar, and then we decide things from there. So we don't have any dates for 2025 just yet, but they are to come as soon as our board approves their dates. So I wanted to make sure you know about December 11th and that we will be planning for the future meetings. Want to thank you for your time. We will not see you before the fall break. And not that anyone here is thinking about a break. We just had Veterans Day, but I am. So before then, I do wish you all a wonderful fall break. And if questions come up after we close out this session, please shoot an email to Vivian and Pauline, and we will make sure to get those responded to. Appreciate you for you and your time. Have a wonderful evening.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.